Hey guys, it's Lindsay J back with another video, and today I'm super excited. Sorry that I haven't been able to post like last week. I actually went to Aspen Fashion Week and walked for one of my BFFs at his runway fashion show. His name is Max Alexander. If you guys want to go see who I'm talking about, he is the world's youngest fashion designer at 9 years old. He started when he was about 4 years old, which is insane. So yes, go check that out on my Instagram at itslindsayj. All the links are down below in the description. And without further ado, let's get into this podcast episode. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to my channel because that would mean so much and it will help me to grow. So, yes, now let's get into it. Dear Diary, today I found myself spiraling into a rabbit hole of thought. One that began with the question of hallucinations, but quickly morphed into something deeper, more expansive, maybe even revolutionary. As I was watching a simulation video on TikTok, a visual representation of what it's like to experience hallucinations from schizophrenia, but as I watched, something strange happened. I realized that if I stared long enough, if I truly allowed myself to slip, I could mimic the hallucination. Not fully, not uncontrollably, but just enough to touch the edge of it. Just enough to understand, in some abstract, intuitive way, what it might feel like to live in that kind of mental landscape. And it made me wonder, what if the people who experience this daily are not broken? What if they're simply attuned to a different layer of consciousness that the rest of us either ignore or suppress? What if the hallucinations are not the problem, but our relationship to them is? What if schizophrenia is not an illness in the traditional sense, but a heightened, unfiltered awareness tangled in fear? Because here's the thing. Fear transforms perception. When you're afraid, your mind interprets a shadow as a threat, a whisper as an insult, a silence as judgment. What if hallucinations, auditory or visual, are simply subconscious fears given shape in sound? And what if the hallucination itself isn't the tormentor? What if it's our reaction to it that causes the spiral? I'm not saying there's no suffering. I'm romanticizing what people endure. I'm not romanticizing what people endure, but I do wonder, what if instead of trying to eliminate the hallucination, we taught people how to change their relationship with it? What if healing doesn't mean silencing the voices, but befriending them? What if the voices became gentler as the person becomes gentler with themselves? So many people with schizophrenia report hearing degrading, threatening, or humiliating messages. That isn't random. That's programming, that's trauma, that's the echo of an inner world saturated with shame, pain, and fear. If the subconscious is the root of hallucinations, if these messages rise from buried emotion, then maybe the key isn't medication alone, but in rebuilding self-worth. If I, with my cross-domain mind, can consciously touch the edges of that realm and remain in control, then perhaps the key is in teaching control through compassion, through confidence, through safety. Not you're crazy and need fixing, but you're powerful and no one ever taught you how to wield it. We teach children how to read, how to share, how to write their names, but no one teaches us how to interpret our inner world, especially not the ones who experience the most intense versions of it. What if we started seeing schizophrenia as a kind of untamed consciousness, one that doesn't need to be extinguished but guided, reclaimed, loved back into coherence? I know people will call this idealistic. I know people will scoff and say you've never lived through it and you don't know. And they're right, I don't. But I have lived through emotional disintegration. I've watched myself drown in my own thoughts. I've clawed my way out of places so dark that language couldn't find them. So no, I don't speak as a professional. I speak as a philosopher, as a feeler, as a mind that refuses to accept that suffering must remain unexplored and misunderstood. Maybe, just maybe, we don't need to eliminate the hallucinations. Maybe we need to teach people how to become the main character in them. What if we taught them how to create a new narrative with their voices? What if every hallucination was a subconscious metaphor, a puzzle to be unlocked, not feared? Imagine telling someone with schizophrenia, that voice in your head, it's not your enemy, it's your wounded child. And the more you love it, the less it will scream. This isn't a treatment plan, it's a dream, but all revolutions start here, don't they? And maybe, just maybe, the hallucination isn't the glitch. It's the messenger. And we've just been too afraid to listen. XOXO, LJ. Oh, that was fun. That was a little bit of a longer intro than my typical intros, but I wanted to keep all my writing in this one. I felt like, I don't know, I feel like this is a very interesting topic. It's a theory that I have, guys. I'm not a professional. I don't do any of that. This is all just a theory. I've studied psychology for a very long time. I am profoundly gifted, which is sometimes insane to believe. So as a cross-domain profoundly gifted individual, you put together information really differently than other people, a lot quicker. You understand things about the world much quicker, much younger, much deeper. And I started doing like university level psychology in like junior high. You know, for Americans, junior high is middle school. So, you know, I started doing like psychology one-on-one back in like middle school. I'm 25 now, so I'm still very young, but even still, you know, because of the kind of mindset that I have, I love to explore things and theorize them and look at them from a philosophical standpoint. So everything that I say, I'm not like a professional or anything. These are literally just my thoughts based off things that I've noticed in my personal life, things that I've learned through doing intense psychological like studying individually and in school. Just not enough to get a degree or anything like that, but I still did study it in school. You know what I'm trying to say? So everything I say, they're just theories. I don't want to come as any disrespect to people who do seriously have some, I hate saying the word struggles because I want people to feel empowered, but if you really do struggle with certain things with schizophrenia, I hope that this can empower you and maybe give you some hope instead of like, you know, hurting you, because the goal is to try and empower you enough to go on a, you know, self-fulfilling, introspective journey where maybe you can love yourself better. And that's what the theory is truly about. It's not about, you know, telling you that your stuff doesn't exist. It's about saying, hey, like, maybe we need to focus on getting you to love yourself. Like, outside of just that, let's make you love yourself, and in doing so, maybe that will change your experience with your illness, you know? And so that's kind of a theory, and that's what we're going to be breaking down today in this episode, because I thought it would be kind of fun. I was hoping that some people may find this interesting, so I'm excited about it. I really am. So I want to talk about the idea of reframing hallucinations as a subconscious output, not a flaw, but a messenger. Right now, the traditional psychiatric framing of schizophrenia that we know is like delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thoughts, and a common public fear around it is that hallucinations equate to psychosis, which equates to dangerous. And I have a counter theory. What if hallucinations are subconscious fear patterns projected outward, not random glitches? Because just like how dreams reflect our subconscious at night, hallucinations may reflect unprocessed trauma while awake. As somebody who is profoundly gifted in cross-domain, typically people who are gifted have this ability to visualize, but to like an extremely profound degree. Like, I can visualize things so well that I can create an entire movie in my head in seconds. Like, it's sometimes it's really weird, it's hard to explain. So when you have that capability of visualization and you have it, because what it is pattern recognition, and your brain cognitively recognizing things much quicker than the average person, so you can put together stories, themes, visuals, all types of things much quicker. And so one of the things like I was thinking about, I was like sitting, I saw this TikTok video, and it was like a simulation of what it looks like to have, you know, hallucinations with schizophrenia, and it was showing like how they're walking through the park. And it was showing how like they were walking through the park and they were seeing all these hallucinations that were talking to them and doing all these things. And so just to see, because I was like, I'm really good at visualization, I stared like straight at a white wall, you know, and like really forced my brain to like try and visualize those same hallucinations in my real life, you know. After some time I was able to do it. But the thing is that for me it wasn't scary, and two, it was also controlled. So that made me wonder, like, okay, well, since I do have a brain that has, you know, a abnormally high cognition, and I have the ability to do something that is similar to somebody of that with schizophrenia, but in a controlled manner where it's like, I can understand how they feel, I can see what they're seeing, and then, but it doesn't affect me, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like extreme compassion or empathy. I'm sure there are people who could probably relate to this, but it's definitely a common trait among people who are gifted. So I was like, all right, well, maybe that's what it is. Like, people with schizophrenia are also known for being extremely creative. So what if their brain is tapped into a, like, quote unquote dimension that we maybe don't really fully understand or have full access to? So like a person who has a average brain or average high intelligence brain, you know, they may be able to touch the surface, but again, they're not going to fully understand those hallucinations. And then somebody with schizophrenia is on the drastic other side where they can't control it, they can't pull it in or out. And a lot of people with schizophrenia, I've noticed, have a common theme of a history of trauma. And because of that, I also wonder if that could be tied to the negative experiences tied to their hallucinations. Most of the time, it's degrading, it's not great, it's bad stuff against them. And because these hallucinations are stemming from things that are going on in their brain, can make possible chemical imbalances, things like this, it's still all stemming from the self. So if the individual themselves have experienced intense trauma that isn't being worked through but medicated because they're trying to treat the symptoms of the illness instead of the illness themselves, then, you know, the individuals are going to project scary voices, scary auditory hallucinations and visual hallucinations, not because the illness itself pushes on negativity, but because the individual themselves doesn't love themselves in the way that they deserve, and then because of that, they project negativity onto the world or themselves. I mean, regular people do this on a daily basis, just different. There's a lot of people who, because they're not happy in their own lives, will project they'll project negative energy outwards, and it will negatively impact their friendships, relationships, things like that. So part of me is wondering, like, what if these are projections of their internal, fears, insecurities, being projected outward? And if that is the case, would it help for us to try and build their self-esteem and make that a priority as well, to see if that has any kind of influence on the way that they look at things, you know? I always just was so curious, because to me schizophrenia is a very fascinating mental illness. Like, as somebody who was always fascinated with psychology, it was always very interesting to me, studying it and learning about it and watching the simulations and trying to understand the experiences of those who have it. And not everybody who has it only has negative experiences. Like, there are some people who, you know, they joke about it, or like they come to terms with it, or they, you know, but still it makes me wonder though, like, you know, maybe the hallucinations will never go away, or the auditory things will never go away. But like, if the person is so happy internally, outwardly, in all the ways, then the thoughts will naturally change. Instead of saying, you suck, you may start hearing voices of like, you look amazing, you look amazing. Again, I can't really say much because I'm not somebody in that like world. I don't have like a degree, and I'm not somebody with schizophrenia, so I don't know. But I just found this topic very interesting, and the research that I have done, I found that very interesting, because I never really saw that talked about. You know, people always talk about medication, sedatives, treatment plans, but they don't talk about self-esteem building. So, you know, it's like, well, why haven't we tried that? You know, it's not to say that what's going on right now isn't good, but it's to say, have we tried all of the possibilities? Or are there things that we could be, you know, doing or changing or something like that in order to better support these individuals, so that they don't just have to try and get rid of their hallucinations and auditory hallucinations as well, but the hallucinations may be easier to handle and deal, because the things that are being said to them will no longer be degrading, but more so positive. So I'm like, what if that's a thing? What if that's something we just haven't examined yet? You know, what if that's just a part of it that we never paid attention to because people are so afraid of the hallucinations? And the other thing that makes me so curious is that I feel as though the human brain itself is capable of reaching that hallucinogenic state when it comes to how they experience it in schizophrenia. And the reason I say that is because there's so many people who take hallucinogens recreationally. I personally don't know what like that experience is, like, you know, doing a whole trip and all that. But I know many people, they do that and they have like a very big spiritual experience. They see things, feel things. So if our brains are capable of reaching that point, and there are people who are doing this in a way that actually helps them spiritually grow, ego death, then who's to say that these individuals aren't just already living on that panel, and we need to help them figure out how to guide it. Just how if people go and they take ayahuasca in another country or something like this, in a traditional setting, I believe there's a shaman, you know, there's a person who guides you through the forest, who guides you through your trip. You're not just going alone. So what if these individuals are the equivalents of people who take hallucinogenics and they don't have any clue what they're doing? They need guidance. They need in Greek mythology, it's called a psychopomp. It's pretty much like a person or a spirit or a thing that walks with you through a certain amount of time throughout your life or your entire life. Doesn't really matter. They're just like people who help you on your journey to self-growth, essentially, and self-discovery. So I'm like, you know, they need some guidance. They need somebody to hold their hand and say, hey, like, I will be your shaman for life. I will be the person who helps you navigate these hallucinations so that instead of suffering with them, you can make them your friend, or you can, you know, change the dialogue that's going on with yourself. Because again, everybody does stuff like that. Most people in general, especially highly intelligent individuals, tend to talk to themselves or have internal dialogues. The only difference is theirs is uncontrollable and much more exacerbated than the average individual. So I'm like, what if there's something in that? What if we dissect it further and realize that a lot of people with schizophrenia, they also have like a lot of ties to various traumas, you know, which, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but like they always have a tie to some kind of really, really not great trauma. So I'm like, maybe that's what it is. Like, that's what it is. They just haven't taken the time to fully heal. They were already dealing with something really hard with the illness itself, but then they spend so much of their time in the beginning process of like getting the diagnosis and doing the thing. They spend so much time in the process of finding medication, finding proper treatment, that I don't know if it's ever a real focus when it comes to self-esteem, confidence building, you know, those types of things. I just don't know if I've ever seen that being prioritized. I feel like it's always been prioritized medication, and that's important, I think. I think that could be very important. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying that, like, in that time when people are so heavily focused on medication, because it takes time to find the proper cocktail for most people with schizophrenia, you know, like, that time they spend on medication. There's no like self-growth, self-reflection happening. Everybody's trying to treat the symptoms of hallucination, auditory, but they're not like, okay, well, what are you actually hearing? What are they saying? What's going on? I know that there are some therapies where they do that for schizophrenia, but I don't know. I just always found this mental illness so fascinating. I really find it fascinating because the human brain is just incredible. It's like, the other illness that I always found, the other illness that I also would always find so fascinating is DID, which is like, what is that? Dissociative identity disorder, where you have like multiple personalities in one body, and they call what a system. Yeah, so I find that very fascinating too, because again, they're all tied to trauma. Those personalities get created when a traumatic like thing happens, and the individual splits part of themselves in order to cope with the traumatic situation happening at hand. So each part of their, like, you know, at least this is the understanding I have of it. So each part of their like personalities that they've built up to protect them, instead of having that integrated into one person, they all get put into different personalities. And, but the reason why I find that illness so interesting is because there have been reports where, like, one personality will be allergic to something and then the other one isn't, and, like, it'll actually show up if they're getting scientifically tested. Like, let's say it's a peanut, right? If you're allergic to peanuts, then it's like one of their personalities is allergic to peanuts, but the other ones are not. When the other ones eat peanuts, they have no reaction. But when the one that does, it has a reaction. So it's like, what does that tell us about our brain? That tells us that when we believe something enough, can we actually cause our body to mimic certain illnesses because of how we function? I mean, the brain is what kind of tells your body what to do. Your brain is what tells your body what sensations to focus, all those things. So it's like, if we're focused enough on something like that, is it possible for it to alter things in the literal realm? So that's what made me fascinated in the illness, was because I heard that story, and then I was like, oh my gosh, that is a whole can of worms that I was not expecting. But I thought that was, because the whole thing I'm trying to say is just that I want people to feel like they can live this life without having to suffer so bad. And if we always are telling people with schizophrenia that, like, you know, you're suffering with this, you got a mental disorder, and you just gotta focus on medication and therapy, like, you know, we're not helping them to also build themselves back up for who they are and feel loved and appreciated. And when you have an illness like schizophrenia that's so heavily stigmatized in society, it's even more important that we're giving them affirmations and, like, affirming just environment so they can, you know, truly feel safe enough to maybe change their internal dialogue. At least that's what I'm thinking. I would love for people who actually do have schizophrenia to, like, respond to me or tell me some things or educate me if I'm, like, wrong on stuff, because, you know, I'm like, I've seen so many stories of people who are truly, truly having a tough time with it. And whenever I see people suffering, my brain, like, immediately goes into problem solving. So I was like, wait, but what can we do? I can't help it. I always think like that. So I was like, what can we do? Is there anything? There must be something. So I hope motivation, inspiration can help to build the internal self-esteem. And once that internal self-esteem is built up and you feel truly confident and happy with who you are, then maybe it will just change and alter what you see and what you hear when it comes to your hallucinations. Something I also want to talk about is that I feel as though society fears what it cannot name or control. And this is especially true when it comes to schizophrenia. I feel like historical treatment of mental illness, from witch burnings to institutions to modern over-medication, you know, there's a lot of things going on. We have so many, like, historical treatments of mental illness, like from the witch burnings to institutions to modern over-medication. And honestly, a lot of those things, especially in the past, were extremely scary and inhumane, which is why they don't exist anymore. But there's also a lot of cultural shame and silence around auditory and visual hallucinations, unless it's recreational or spiritual. And people fear hallucinations because they symbolize a loss of control. But what if that's not the whole story? Because if our inner world is chaotic, then of course what we project becomes terrifying. But maybe the solution isn't to silence it, but to rewire the world it's echoing from. I just find that the double standard is very interesting, because you have people who literally pay and go through experiences on purpose to experience the hallucinations, auditory hallucinations from psychedelics. But when it comes to individuals with schizophrenia and who truly have a mental disorder that causes these hallucinations, we treat it differently. We stigmatize them, we treat them as if they're dangerous to society, and while that is possible too, I feel as though what we shouldn't be focusing on is just the symptoms, just that. We should also be looking into the root of what's truly going on inside the brain of the individual who has the illness itself. How do they feel about themselves? How do they feel about their lives and their self-images? And not like the whole, oh, I'm good, I'm fine, how are you? But like, how are you actually, you know? Are you truly happy with who you are? Do you feel beautiful when you look in every single mirror? Because if the answer is no, then that can tell you why some of those hallucinations may be so negative, so degrading and not great. But if you change your mindset, I wonder what would happen. Leo, stop. Stop. Good. And I feel like it's also interesting because we always feel as though when anything like gives us a feeling of like a loss of control, we like super fear it. That's why there's so many people who don't like roller coasters, heights, skydiving, a lot of like adrenaline things, because people don't like to lose control. Leo, stop. One of the things I always wondered too is like why people fear so much the things that they don't understand. You know, like I don't want to come across as if I'm somebody who's against medication. I think it's extremely important. But medication only treats the surface. You know what I mean? I feel like medication is only half the work. There's still the other half that the individual themselves has to go through in order to learn how to survive with their mental health, to do things. It's not enough to just take medication. And so because of that fact, what if we're missing out on an entire world, an entire internal ecosystem that could be further nurtured in a way that allows for these individuals to experience their symptoms in a way that's less intense, less negative, you know? If you're afraid of certain things, or you're like, you just don't like who you are, then you're gonna hear self-criticism as your internal dialogue. The only difference between somebody who's hypercritical of themselves and somebody with schizophrenia is that somebody with schizophrenia has an uncontrollable issue and they see things typically and hear things. It's different, but the internal dialogue could be stemming from the same place. You know, person A may not have schizophrenia, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they experience trauma. What if the two individuals have experienced the same exact traumatic event, but the individual with schizophrenia, again, has the lack of ability to control certain aspects of the way they handled it, whereas the individual without it is capable of healing and growing to an extent, but at the same time, they still carry a lot of trauma, a lot of, you know, internal criticism because of that same event that happened to both of them. And that's why I always like to get people to try and like think outside of their own perspectives, you know? I feel like it's important that when like we talk about mental illness and we talk about things, we stay compassionate and understanding of what these individuals are going through so that we can try and come up with creative solutions to make their lives easier. Again, I have no idea what it must be like to have schizophrenia. I can only imagine how much you have to go through. And that's exactly why I'm voicing my opinion on this, because I always wondered, and I hope that this can start a conversation, I always wondered if that lack of confidence could be tied to what people are experiencing with their hallucinations and those negative voices that they hear, those negative things that they hear. What if that's just self-talk personified? What if that's the most extreme level of self-criticism and negative talk, just negative dialogue within yourself? Because we all have that. We all have inner voices, but it's not the same as somebody with schizophrenia. Theirs is much more intensified, and I think that's because of a wiring that's going on in their brain. But if they're, healed from their traumas, they feel good about themselves and they feel good about their story, would it change the dialogue? That's my question. Would it change the dialogue? Would it change what they're hearing, what they're seeing? Would it change how they feel about their illness, about their way of being? And because of that, will they start to project a more positive thing? Maybe the hallucinations and the auditory voices and stuff will never go away, but maybe we can try to at least make it easier for them to live. I don't want mental illness to be like a end all be all. I think it's something that has to continuously advance, and I think it's something that we have to advance not just through medication and innovative tech, but through compassion, through the lens of understanding human behavior, of understanding how people feel and understanding their trauma. Because something I've noticed within the psychiatric world and literature world, these individuals have become extremely analytical and less compassionate than I think we need in the actual mental health world. I think there's a lot of psychologists who are not very compassionate, not very understanding. They're very analytical, and they are taught to look at things through a specific lens and follow a specific way of doing things, and if it doesn't go through that way, then they don't know. A lot of psychologists don't understand nuance. There's just Leo! There's just a lot of lack of understanding through a compassionate lens. It's like they're all looking for dysfunction. They're all searching for dysfunction. And yes, we can do that too, but we have to also remind ourselves to be kind because these are real people. You know, real people with real insecurities, real past traumas and stories that deserve to be heard, deserve to be affirmed, and deserve to be healed. Leo! And I want us to also consider the fact that, historically speaking, illnesses like schizophrenia, individuals were faced with pretty much cruelty and torture for having these illnesses. Like, that's where we started. That was our baseline when it comes to introducing mental health into humankind, essentially. We locked these individuals up, put them away in places that were unsafe, and put them subject to literal cruelty and torture. So, if that's the case, wouldn't you say that there's a good chance that we're still relatively behind on the way we approach mental health, especially illnesses that were faced with terrible torment in the early stages of its arrival into humankind? I mean, that makes me very much question whether or not we truly understand what it is we think we do when it comes to these illnesses, because if our baseline is torture, then maybe there's a lot more positive things that we could try and find and positive solutions that we could look into when it comes to this too, because oh my gosh, those insane asylums, they used to do terrible things to people, especially the individuals who had, you know, mental illnesses that created psychosis or delusions or hallucinations. They were severely mistreated and subject to torturous acts in response to their issues. And again, what we notice in that is that all these psychologists were so focused on treating the symptoms. They noticed that these individuals were talking to things or seeing things, and instead of really getting to know and understand the individual themselves and how they may feel about themselves, we decided it would be a good idea to torture them instead and try and get them to mellow out, which really ended up turning a lot of people into a vegetable and also, you know, unaliving many people at the same time. So I just think that that's a very interesting part of our history. So now I want to bring in some more of maybe the interesting, under-talked about aspects of schizophrenia here in America. Because what if schizophrenia isn't a malfunction, but an ancient faculty of perception misinterpreted through a Western medical lens? Because in indigenous cultures across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, individuals who hear voices or have visions are not always seen as sick. In fact, they are often trained as seers, shamans, or medicine people. Among the Daragara people in Burkina Faso, for example, those who show signs of mental disturbance are brought to elders, not psychiatrists. The belief is that these people are being called into initiation. An anthropologist, Tanya Luraman from Stanford, found that in countries like India and Ghana, auditory hallucinations are less likely to be violent or self-harming and more likely to be experienced as benign, even loving. This contrasts sharply with the Western framework where hallucinations are framed as dangerous or pathological. And why is that? And I think it's because context shapes perception. When people are told their minds are broken, they respond with fear. But when they're told their minds are gifted, they learn to dialogue with their inner world instead of fearing it. So that was something I found very fascinating in my personal opinion when it comes to schizophrenia as well, is because maybe in the Western world we see that in like movies and stuff like that, where people see visions and they get taken to like the elders or whatever, but this is a real thing in real life. It's just in other countries, other cultures, and I find that very interesting, especially since we see an example in the African culture where they said that their experiences are benign and sometimes loving. That directly talks about what I was saying earlier, where I think that if we reframe the individual's perception of themselves, it could change the way that they perceive their hallucinations and the auditory hallucinations they experience as well. Maybe they won't become so self-harming, and maybe they can become loving or benign as well. And I think it's interesting that there's already a society of people who are successfully doing so. I think that we should be kind of taking from that culture and maybe examining what it is that they're doing in order for that to be so, you know, successful. Because one of the questions I always would ask myself is like, well, what if the hallucinated voice is not the enemy, but a forgotten part of the self? Using internal family systems, IFS, we might interpret the angry voice not as an invader, but as a protector part, a fragmented child that only knows how to yell because it was never heard. And in this framing, healing isn't elimination, it's integration, communication, and leadership. Because then you become the main character in your own hallucination. You write a new script and you narrate the plot instead of being at the mercy of it. And that's why I like inviting these various perspectives, because if these individuals who we deem through a pathological lens and also stigmatized to such a high degree in a negative regard, and these are the same individuals who are being used as medicine people, shamans, all types of healing, individuals who have spiritual abilities. I find it very interesting that that's not something that's more talked about on the Western medicine. And I think it's because when we don't understand things, we tend to just push everything away. It's kind of how our culture is nowadays. It's like people would rather compartmentalize everything, do what's easy, stay in their own little world, because they don't want to risk something bad happening to what they're up to, you know? I feel like that's how a lot of people are. Nobody's willing to just like let go and live anymore. Nobody's like wanting to just be open-hearted and try things and, you know, be transparent about themselves and the life that they want. I feel as though so many times people kind of just like push those things aside, and for the average individual, those feelings will come out negatively and they'll project onto the people that we care about and that love us, especially. So while it may project outwardly in our relationships and our abilities to form connections, but in these schizophrenic minds, I think instead of projecting it outward in their way of attaching, it's more internalized, and that internalization creates a projection of perception, aka the hallucinations or auditory hallucinations, where, you know, they're hearing their internal voice to such an extreme degree that we can't even fathom, because their brain is just wired at a frequency in which we cannot access, at least not without the involvement of psychedelic drugs, or, I mean, I guess I feel like that's the only thing, or hypervisualization skills. I think that that's just a very interesting thing. I hope that one day we can start to approach things like this with more curiosity. I think it can become really dangerous when we don't approach things with curiosity, like, because when you don't ask questions and when you don't try to gain clarity, you can shut things that are really, really important. You can shut them out before they even have a chance to shine. So sometimes it's worth looking stupid, or it's worth looking unsure, because in the end you can always say that at least you did what you could and you gave your all in every situation. Because I always learned, at least in my own personal experience, that in the past, the times that I used to feel like I would regret with something or I was upset with myself, it was typically because I didn't say everything I had to say. There were still things left unsaid. So now I've learned to just be truthful and transparent the whole time, because now I can always move through life with a conscience that's always transparent and clean. I know everything that I say and do aligns with who I am and how I show up to the world for myself and for others. And I think that it's like the best way to live. And regardless of if you have schizophrenia or you don't, or you have depression, whatever, that synchronicity, you know, that I have within my life, I think is what can help to create a more like grounded perception of reality, or like I'm capable of seeing joy in tiny things in ways that I think a lot of people kind of miss out on, especially after they become older or grow up. And I think it's because I have like this deep acceptance for like myself and the world around me. And I think once we fully accept ourselves and we're no longer like afraid of what we look like or how other people may interpret us, the way that we show up in the world will be different inherently, because you're no longer functioning from, okay, like, what will everybody think if I do this, or how will they feel if I do this? You're more so thinking from what feels right to me in this moment, and what is respectful to them in the process. You know, how can I communicate my feelings effectively in a way that will help to create a productive outcome? You know, and I think clear communication in any situation is the productive outcome. And so I'm like, you know, I think that if we were to allow for these individuals to have the space to heal from stuff, if we gave people the space to heal from their trauma, it could deeply impact the way that they perceive their hallucinations. I think it's extremely fascinating, though, that in other cultures they're used as shamans. I think it's because they, you know, they look at them as like individuals who can see things that others can't, you know, like they are reaching another realm that we can't access without the use of psychedelic drug enhancement. And so these cultures, because they're more spiritual based, they don't approach situations, issues, and new things in a way that I think the Western society kind of does. We kind of approach things, new things, in kind of a negative way, a very fearful way. It's like literally everything. It's ingrained in our society. Like, people approach relationships, each other, work, everything with such a guarded, jaded mentality of like, I need to protect myself all the time. And it's just so unnecessary. But like, when you go to other places where they're not tainted by that reality, and they have a better understanding of the purpose of life and what it actually means to live, you know, they are more focused on curiosity, because they want to understand how other people live. They don't want to monetize off of it, control it, manipulate. Like, that's not what they're thinking. They're like, wow, that's fascinating. Let's figure out why this individual is capable of doing that, what they're seeing, and if it can be useful to our people. How can we use their ability for the greater good, instead of how do we make them feel bad? How do we torture them into becoming someone they're not and making them like us? And even if that was our goal, why do we believe that cruelty is the pathway to that? Why is it that we feel like cruelty is the best way for us to go to that conclusion? That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, what are you doing? What in the world is going on? Because that to me is weird. I think it's and like, not only that, but schizophrenia isn't the only mental illness that experiences hallucinations. Sometimes people with PTSD also experience visual and auditory hallucinations. So again, there's another trauma like thing there. You know, the common denominator there again is trauma based. So I'm like, but what people with PTSD are seeing in their hallucinations are usually representations of what happened when they became traumatized. Like, one of the most common ones I think I've seen is like war veterans who may have seen, you know, their friends pass away or something. They may then have hallucinations of their friend talking to them, especially if they have a guilty conscience because they feel like they weren't able to like protect their friend in that moment, and you know, they feel like they could have done more. It really impacts them. So when they go back home, they're still in that mentality, and so sometimes they will talk to their friend or talk to, you know, just, it's an example of stuff that will happen. And I mean this to say that that's another example of how trauma is what they're seeing, aka a projection of a fearful moment that had happened. A projection. That's the common denominator here. It's a projection. And so if we reframe the lens of the individual who's projecting that image, will it change the image they see? And I swear, I think they've got figured out in Africa, because in Africa they're saying yes. They're saying yes. Because medicine people, like, just think about that, right? It's like, how are they able to take individuals who see hallucinations and translate that into an individual who can then heal you, help you? And I think the reason why is because, like, again, if we reframe schizophrenia as a whole and we stop pathologizing it and start looking at it as something spiritual and different, the lens completely changes, and it opens us up to such an abstract you know, pathway of ways of thinking and considering the illness itself. And so I'm like, well, if they're able to see projections then maybe if they're hypersensitive, right? They're hypersensitive and empathetic. Like how you can pick up on if somebody's not feeling good that day. Well, then maybe not only are they recognizing that through an empathetic lens, like, okay, I can tell this person isn't feeling okay, but they are visually seeing the spirits or the energy that that person is putting out there, you know? And I think that's why in other cultures they use that as a tool. Because if somebody has like an inner sadness or inner darkness, they can then go to these individuals, and these individuals will see that darkness because of their capabilities of touching into a realm that we can't naturally access ourselves. And they provide insight that the individual can't themselves get to, you know? And again, that's why most people go on psychedelic trips. So I'm like, what if these individuals are just living inside one? That's a lot to imagine. I've never done like a whole psychedelic trip thing, but I just feel like permanently doing that sounds a little scary. Maybe controlled with a shaman, I'm like, okay, but like, I can see why that could be overwhelming if uncontrolled, you know? And I just feel like if people are considering that these individuals are people that could heal and help and guide and provide use to their whole community, I just feel like that should open up a further discussion on how we are perceiving mental illness at a whole here in the States, how we handle these situations, because the pharmaceutical company benefits from everybody being sick. So many people know this. I feel like it's exactly why our food system sucks so much, is because they benefit from us not feeling well. So it's like, let's kill two birds with one stone. Let's buy super cheap food, mass produce super cheap unhealthy food, which will keep making them sick, and it's for super cheap. Then they'll have to go to the doctor, stay consistent to all these things, and they'll have to all pay a super high fee while doing so at the same time. You know, it's like they don't care about you, your health, your whatever. They care about money. They care about how can they profit off of vulnerable individuals who are in need. And it's sad. It's really not great, you know? Really not great. So I think it's interesting that in other places, these individuals are being provided a space where they're looked at as people who can help and provide a new way of looking at the world that can be of aid to individuals who are lost or trying to find themselves, or trying to, you know, find the guidance to get themselves out of where they're going. You know, again, if an individual is looked at as a spiritual healer, then regardless of if you believe in their abilities, right, like their actual abilities to see your pain through hallucinic, I can't even say that word, from hallucinations, there we go. But they can't, like, you know, see through hallucinations. The individuals who believe that they can will subconsciously allow themselves to feel free enough to experience the emotions that they're going in there for. So regardless of if you believe in their power, they still end up having power to the individuals who provide it to them. And that's not to say that they don't have power. I'm just saying, like, from a devil's advocate perspective, even if you don't believe in the spirituality behind what schizophrenia could look like in another culture, just also recognize that if you believe something is to be true, and the individual who holds the power isn't like what we're used to, where they manipulate it for bad, they're actually using their power for good to heal people, and that's it, then for me it's like, well, they're creating the impact regardless of what is causing it directly. Because if you're going into a meeting with one of these individuals and they're known to be like a spiritual healer, you're already going in there with your guard down, period. And that's something that a lot of people are afraid to do in their regular day life. So that's why they seek out those individuals. So regardless of if the individual truly carries super deep powers in the way that you may perceive what powers to be, they're still causing a deep impact in the individuals who go there, because they're already showing up with an open heart, with excitement into a new journey. And so they give themselves completely to those individuals. And then, I mean, I believe that they can see a projection through auditory and visual hallucinations of what that individual may be experiencing emotionally during that time. And again, the reason I say that is just because I feel like these are all innate things that humans already do. Like, when we go into a room, we can definitely tell, like, if we're, like, talking to somebody who seems like they're a little sad that day. Like, we can pick up on it, right? But, like, the difference is that because we're not in that realm, we're not capable of, like, seeing that emotion and then projecting it into a real visual representation. So what I'm saying is like, what if that's what they do in those locations where it's looked at as more spiritual? Whereas here, it's all self-harm because of how we treat them, how they are, you know, taught to live with their, you know, auditory and visual hallucinations and how to deal with them. Like, what if that plays a massive role into what it is? I think that mental health is also another great example of a part of our system where they profit off of, and sometimes it's not good. So I'm like, I want us to expand our mindset and just look at that for a second, because maybe if their minds are free to experience and express, they'll express it just like we do, but to that next level. You know, we walk into a room and we feel the energy of somebody feeling sad, and we can put it into a metaphor or analogy to express their pain. We could turn it into a poem, a rap song, or whatever, lyrics to express other people's pain. But because we're not in touch with that same realm, we can't project it outward unless we're under the enhancement of psychedelic drugs, which means our brains are definitely capable of it, but the average brain isn't capable without enhancement. So I'm like, what if these individuals, they're just in that mind state, they don't need the enhancement. What they need is guidance on how to go through that. They need a shaman who teaches them how to be a shaman, which I'm sure exists, just not out here, of course. And I think with that safety or that space that they would have to, like, fully express their thoughts, their everything, I think it would just make life easier, and I think we could learn so much from that. I think it's really sad to see how cold and closed off we are as a society. Like, people are just so closed off and shut down. People are afraid of opening up, of sharing, of having emotions, of loving, of, like, people are just afraid, and I never understand why, because what is the point of life if you have nothing to care about that much? Like, I don't want to live life feeling okay and mediocre and safe. I don't want to live my whole life playing it safe. That sounds awful. I want, like, somebody who, if I lost them, I would want to freaking die instantly because I loved them so much. And that, to me, is honestly extremely common, just not in America. And that's the sad part. And that's why I'm like, well, let's restore that by spreading compassion and empathy through knowledge, through communication, through humanitarianism, through acts of kindness for no reason. Like, let's just find ways to build our humanity back and remind each other how important connection truly is, because if something were to happen, we all went through like a zombie apocalypse, or all the internet was to shut off instantly, you would have nobody to rely on except for your neighbors. You would have nothing. You would have nothing. Because think about this, even like your family members aren't all going to be living in your neighborhood or in your area or whatever. So even if you have family members you want to help, or who want to help you, they're not there. Because they're not even geographically there, and guess what? All the airports are shut down, so guess what you have? You have community, and that's it. So once we lose our humanity, it's the end of humankind, at least in my personal opinion, long term. Because we'll become so reliant upon technology, upon surface level things, especially in America, that we'll forget how to connect with each other outside of it. And so if something happens to threaten the shallow ecosystem that's being created, then humankind will literally just kind of combust, because all the things it relies on would be shut off. And because of our inability to know how to connect and our very fearful mentality, we'd probably end up in more so of a purge mentality where people are like harming each other instead of helping. And that would make it even worse, because that's all the things I always think about too. I'm like, okay, even in like post-apocalyptic societies, right? Like, it's an apocalypse. Like, so many people are so guarded. They're like, oh my god, we can't help everyone. We gotta figure out our own thing. Makes sense, because we're in like a situation or whatever, but at the same time it doesn't actually make logical sense when you understand how agriculture works, how life works. Like that's the thing. It's like we're so uneducated here, but there's like indigenous cultures who have been doing that for decades and centuries and still do to this day and live happier lives than the individuals who literally can buy everything here. They live in huts, they're extremely healthy, lots of times incredibly beautiful, healthy skin, everything, just, you know, happy in their world. And it's just like the mentality is just a little bit like different, and I feel like it values community and trust and helping others. And here it's like people just really want to be hyper independent, and hyper independence doesn't lead to growth. It doesn't lead to anything worth fighting for. Like, because what are you gonna have? Like a massive mansion that's empty, you know? And I don't want that. Like, I just don't want that. I want a happy life. I want people in my world who are like loving and excited and happy and just like want to, you know, love and like figure things out and do things like that, because that's what life is actually about. You know, we can only work and work and work so much, but just think, like, what if on your way home you get in a car accident, it's your last day here? Would you be happy with how you lived your life? And if the answer is no, because you didn't reach where you were going, then I challenge you to just sit down and remind yourself of what you're grateful for having and how far you've come from your worst, darkest point of your life. Because I think that will be enough to humble you, because at the end of the day, what matters most is growth, not the percentage of it. Anybody out there who understands investing, you know, and all those things, it's like you're not gonna say, hey, I don't like a 10% annual like return, which is pretty high, but I'll just say a 10% annual return versus a 90 annual return. It's like, yeah, I'm still gonna take the 10. Of course, like, I would love to have the 9 all the time. I'll take those whenever they come, but I'm not gonna say no to the 10 just because it's not the highest amount. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know. I feel like if we just remind each other what truly matters, and we remember that what matters is that we're growing and not actually how fast we do it and how perfectly we do it, but just the fact that we do it at all is what really matters, then that's it. Like, you know, live your life from day to day. Stop worrying so much about if you're doing things right or saying things right or whatever. Just always be yourself, because again, like, just constantly ask yourself the same question throughout the day. If something happened to me right now, would I be happy with the decisions I'm making in my life? And if the answer is no, then you have to ask yourself a follow-up question. Then why am I living like this? Why am I doing this? You have the power to decide what you do with your life. If you're not happy with where you are, you have the power to change that. If you don't want to be alone, you have the power to change that. But you have to change your own attitude and your own perception on the things that you fear before you can even allow yourself to enjoy the life that you truly want. And that's why you stay stuck in familiarity and comfort. And it's like, it harms everyone when you do that, especially you, because you're missing out on some of the most beautiful aspects of life, which is making memories and remembering what it's like to breathe in between all the chaos of things that life throws at us, you know. Alright, so now I want to talk about the future of mental health and how we may be wanting to use empathy as a form of treatment. The main idea is that empathy isn't soft, it's radical. It's the medicine psychiatry that's forgotten. And so I thought it would be very important for me to bring up some facts, some things that you guys can think of. That way you can understand that, you know, let's look at where we're at right now when it comes to the quality of our mental health system. So the biochemistry of belief. Studies from UCLA and Harvard show that belonging and emotional validation decreases cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and increases serotonin, which is a mood stabilizer. But this is no longer just a concept, guys. Empathy has a psychological, well, a sociological impact on somebody else's life. Placebo studies have proven that belief changes biology. So what if we applied that to mental health? What if believing in a person's wholeness could begin to reshape their neural pathways? As I said, the stress hormone, the stress hormone, which is also known as cortisol, can extremely impact your brain, your body, and how it functions and how it works. There have been proven studies that talk about this, about how your beliefs and the way that you think really truly does change your biology, which is why a lot of people talk about biochemistry and biohacking, those types of things. And we forget that an increase of serotonin is actually a natural mood stabilizer. So if you're living a life or you're building a life surrounded by happiness, surrounded by growth, excitement, love, you're boosting your natural serotonin. Even when you have a mental health disorder, this is just what I'm saying. Like, you're building up your serotonin levels. So that is super important. And that's why I want to talk about why it isn't really being funded, because the psychiatry gets billions in pharmaceutical research, but less than 5% of global health budgets go to socio-social or psychosocial care. Psychiatry gets billions in pharmaceutical research, but less than 5% of global health budgets go to psychosocial care. And it's like, why don't we fund it? Is it because of self-esteem therapy, identity integration sessions, narrative authoring coaches, peer-led, love-based treatment models? Why don't we have those types of things in place? And I think that it could be because they don't benefit from happy individuals in this government. Even the marketing tactics that we use are fueled into other individuals' insecurities and the things that they wish they could attain. That's what they manipulate in order to make money. And that's how marketing looks. But in my personal opinion, I don't think it has to be that way. I think there's a way for us to actually profit off of healthiness, success, happiness. I think there's absolutely just as many ways to profit and gain joy for everyone at the same time, instead of having to build on the expense of other people's happiness, other people's pains and suffering and insecurities and fears. Like, I don't like that we have a structure that kind of fuels people's insecurities in order to manipulate them into doing things that, you know, maybe aren't things that they would have originally gone to. Like, we literally spend millions of dollars trying to sedate symptoms, but then pennies trying to understand their origin stories. And it's like, well, if you're treating the symptoms without actually getting to the root cause of what it is, then we're not really doing anything, you know? And once you bring in the international standpoint, you start looking at how they've treated it out there. It's like, what don't we know? What are we not aware of? Where are the gaps in our system that these other places have been able to figure out? Because again, if in Africa these individuals are having benign hallucinations, which is polar opposite, by the way, to what we know for schizophrenia to be here in Western culture, like, it does raise a lot of questions. If they're used as medicine people, shamans, guiders of spirits in other cultures, what is it that we are missing that's causing us to want to sedate, seclude, and control individuals, you know? And that's why I'm always like, okay, well, that's why it's kind of scary that they kind of defund education, because if you don't have any education, you don't know all these perspectives, and it makes you easier to manipulate, which is why they're defunding. And again, I think that mental health isn't being taken as seriously either, and I think it's because there's a lot of benefits from people being mentally ill. Again, that sounds so bad, but it is. It really is bad, and I believe that it's true. I think that mental health contributes to homelessness, to the prison system, and to insecurities. And so when you just sedate the symptoms, but you don't change the individual who's created the system to begin with, then they continue to suffer. It's just sedated a little bit, but there's still suffering that's happening because the true person is not actually getting to express, feel, and be as they are. And because of that, there's a big dissonance, and so they're not able to integrate themselves with whatever it is that they have mentally. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe we should start examining on different ways that we could start interpreting the same thing. Maybe instead of looking at these symptoms of things to just sedate, maybe we start looking into ways of finding, you know, solutions on how to make them benign, because to me that is just so fascinating. It's like, how in the world are people seriously able to just see these hallucinations and they could be completely benign? That's not how we understand schizophrenia here in Western culture. So that's why I'm like, it's important for us to keep those outlets where we can learn, grow, and educate ourselves based off of what's going on in other places, because when we don't do that, we become easy targets to manipulation, to profiting, to all those things, because again, the prison system is business. They benefit from people being in there. Prison systems are like the equivalents of an apartment complex. So like when you have people in there, those are like your tenants. That's why you'll notice they don't rehabilitate people, because if they don't rehabilitate you, you're like a forever tenant. And what do tenants do? They give them passive income. So, you know, that's how they are, you know, looking at it. And I don't know if the individuals themselves are truly looking at it that way, or if it's a perpetuated cycle within our system structure that has created this situation to happen. You know, if we restructured certain things in the way that we handle these situations, we could find ways for people to benefit without it having to be at the detriment, again, of other people's lives and at the expense of others. I think that we could seriously find some great solutions, but a lot of times people just don't want to put in the effort. They don't want to put in that extra little bit of effort to make sure everybody is okay. Most people would prefer to just like give up or just walk away from things. Like, it just seems like that's how our world is lately. People are extremely passive and cowardice with a lot of the things that they do. So I'm like, no, we can't be doing that. And I think it all ties to mental health. They make money from you buying all these medications. They make money from you going to a therapist and a psychologist regularly so you can get all these things. I'm not saying any of that is bad. It could be extremely necessary, right? But at the same time, though, it also makes you think, well, are you healing for real? Are you healing yourself? And are you so ashamed of who you are and what you have that you no longer recognize that there could be strength and power in that too? That you still have the ability to decide and have control over your own mind. You are not you are not your illness. You are a person who has something that makes things hard for you in a way that others just can't understand and won't ever experience without it. But you're not at the mercy of your mental illness. You have the power to find a way to integrate it. And I think that we should encourage more people to do that. Because again, while the hallucinations may never go away, or the auditory things will never go away, what you hear and what you see may change. And if there's a chance of that happening, aren't you willing to do the work that may be scary or hard or difficult in order to get to that point? Wouldn't you rather see like a beautiful figure as opposed to something scary? That could be possible, because what you're seeing could be a direct projection of what your internal self is feeling. If you don't feel confident in yourself, if you're worried what people think about you, if you have certain insecurities, then your mind will project them. And unlike other people, it projects them as real visual and auditory hallucinations. And I truly feel as though I believe in everybody out there who suffers with whatever they suffer with. You know, I have some stuff that I suffer with too, okay? But, you know, like, I believe so wholeheartedly that if we just try, we can improve bit by bit, and we can improve into a version of ourselves that has successfully integrated the aspects of ourselves that we used to fear. I don't think you have to stay stuck where you're at, you have the ability to grow further, to get that happiness that you so much deserve and are looking for. Do not let your mental health stop you. Don't let it make you feel like you are unworthy of love, of happiness, of genuine connection. That's your mental illness telling you what you should believe, but that's not who you are. Who you are is someone who's beautiful, who's capable, who's shining like a bright star, but who's locked behind this, dark storm that tries to convince you otherwise. But again, it's a storm you're battling. It's not you. So if we focus on trying to make sunlight to take away the storm, then, the clouds may be there, right? But the rain will go away. So, I think what we should start doing is taking these mental illnesses that are so heavily stigmatized. And even if we sound ignorant, like maybe I sound ignorant with this whole podcast, but like even if we sound ignorant because I don't have it, I think it's important that individuals who don't have it start opening up dialogue so that the people who do have it feel like they have a space in the rest of society where they can experience their struggles without being shamed or victim to harassment or judgment or, just difficulties, social difficulties. Because those social difficulties are what directly ties into their self-esteem, their worthiness, their feeling of being valuable. So when somebody feels outcasted from society and ashamed of something that so deeply is integrated into their everyday life, that's something that does definitely get internalized, even for people who try to shut it out or pretend like they don't feel things. We all feel things. We're all human. Doesn't matter who you are. You can try and act like you're not, but you are. So get over it. Deal with it. You got feelings. We all do. So if you're not in touch with it, it's because you're pushing them away on purpose. And that's not always a good thing. So I would say that sometimes it's important for us to go through the emotions, because if we don't, we compartmentalize, we push it down, and then eventually it comes out when we least expect it. And sometimes that can be in a negative way, and sometimes that could be in a self-harming way, where we start to see our own insecurities projected in front of us. I can only imagine what that's like, but again, as somebody who doesn't have it, I'm hoping that if I open this dialogue, if I start talking about it, if I start offering my opinion and thoughts of ways that we could try and support those individuals, that maybe I could gain extra knowledge, use my platform to raise awareness for things like that. Because again, we shouldn't have to force individuals who are suffering with mental illness to fight for destigmatization behind their mental illness. It should be the rest of society's responsibility to make sure that we feel like those individuals are still included and still valuable to this world and society. But because we live in a country that values productivity in a way that's destructive to the human psyche, we forget that there's other ways to add value to someone than what you can just transactionally name and label, like financing and those things. There's so much more to life, so much more to things than just that. Here in America, there's so many people who like psychedelics, who do all types of stuff. And yet you're going, just so that you could experience those hallucinations and see stuff, yet you are going to sit there and judge someone else who sees them every day, but you're the one who's paying for their experience. And let's be real here, not everyone who has those trips has a good one. There's a lot of people who had bad ones, and guess what a shaman would say? It's that you have some inner darkness, and in another world, if you don't understand this in a Western society, shamans are typically individuals who we would call schizophrenic. That's something that people don't fully get. So that's why they're able to guide you, especially through a situation where you're hallucinating. They can see what you see because they see it every day. They can see what you're seeing. They project it into reality, but they found a way to control it. But here we tell those individuals they're bad. We say you're bad. And what do? We pay thousands of dollars to leave the country and experience it with people who are authentic. Well, we have those individuals here, but we're choosing to silence them. Why I think it's because our world doesn't know how to integrate things that are different. Our culture doesn't incorporate anything having to do with real culture, religion, spirituality into our united nations. We keep things extremely compartmentalized, boxed up with titles, and then we divide each other so much that it's starting to cause conflict within each other. We are now battling against each other more than we ever have, when we should be battling the individuals who have created an environment where we feel like we need to battle each other in the first place. If this is supposed to be a place where individuals are truly united, then why is it that we have so many people offing themselves? Why is it that so many people are unhappy? And why is it that we prioritize somebody's output more than we prioritize them? Is that our version of success? Our version of success is running people down into their grave because we think that all they can do for us is produce, and that's it? I mean, I don't understand. Then we travel and we spend all this time doing things we hate just to get a little bit of time to leave the country, and guess what the fuck we do? We go and have a psychedelic trip in the woods with a shaman. And then we come back home, and what do? We judge the individuals who could be shamans right in front of us. And I don't know, that to me says a lot about our culture. It says a lot about how we act. It says a lot about who we choose to show up as in the world around us. We would rather travel to another country, to another place to experience something we could have right here if we stopped judging and started listening and finding ways to creatively integrate these individuals into society and feel safe in a way that allows them to express and be just how they are. And then guess what, Susan? You may not have to go all that far to have that fun psychedelic trip out in Joshua Tree, okay? So, alright, y'all, I just want to thank you so much for joining me in today's episode. We are about to get into the outro Dear Diary entry in a second, but I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Please make sure you go check out my other social medias if you want to stay in connections, and also leave a comment under this video, whether you're on YouTube or you're listening to me on Spotify. Please leave a comment because I love to hear and see what you guys think about the things that I'm up to or what I'm saying, because I feel like some of these conversations could be deemed controversial. And again, I'm only one person who is open to other people's ideas, thoughts, beliefs, interpretations, and I would like to grow, and the only way I can do that is by hearing other people's opinions. So I would love to hear what you guys think of this episode. I would love to see you on any of my other platforms where I post more consistently, and make sure you go over and DM me and, you know, comment under my post so I can see you and say hi. So, Dear Diary, maybe the hallucination is not the enemy. Maybe it's the messenger of a child who never got to speak. A bruised memory that's grown into a phantom to be seen. A sacred dream trying to be born through the chaos. We lock these dreams in padded rooms because we are afraid of what we don't understand. But what if we ask the dream its name? In ancient lands, they didn't call this madness. They called it vision. They called it initiation. What if we've mistaken a frequency for a flow? What if the screaming voice is simply a frequency we haven't learned to interpret? What if it speaks a language the Western world forgot? A dialect of soul, not symptom. The moment we stop fearing the mind is the moment we are finally free within it. So don't kill the voice. Give it a script. Don't silence the dream, teach it to speak, because no one heals by erasing. We heal by reclaiming. XOXO. LJ. Okay, I feel like I need to do it one more time though, because I had like a ding happen on the thing, so let's do it all one more time again. I don't know why I didn't just stop. It's all good in the hood, okay? Okay. Dear Diary, maybe the hallucination is not the enemy. Maybe it's the messenger of a child who never got to speak. A bruised memory that's grown into a phantom to be seen. A sacred dream trying to be born through the chaos. We lock these dreams in padded rooms because we are afraid of what we don't understand. But what if we ask the dream its name? In ancient lands, they didn't call this madness, they called it vision. They called it initiation. So what if we've mistaken a frequency for a flow? What if the screaming voice is simply a frequency we haven't learned to interpret? What if it speaks a language the Western world forgot? A dialect of soul, not symptom? The moment we stop fearing the mind is the moment we are finally free within it. So don't kill the voice. Give it a script. Don't silence the dream. Teach it to speak. Because no one heals by erasing. We heal by reclaiming. XOXO. LJ. That was like my little happy dance because I finished the episode and now I'm about to go eat, girl. I'm like, I need to eat some food because I'm hungry. Thanks so much for watching this video. It took a lot for me to freaking do this one. I've just been going through a lot recently, y'all, and I have just been tired and drained from a lot of things going on. So, but we're back on our grind. So everything's good now. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please make sure you give it a thumbs up if you haven't already. Give me a subscribe too, because that will help my channel to grow. And I love you guys so very much, and I'll see you in the next one. I don't know why I just had an accent, but I'll see you in the next video. Peace on the street.